Hi everybody. So in this video, I just want to briefly talk about, or give some suggestions on what kind of different phases, um, or the kind of a structure to preparing a manuscript. And this focuses mostly on the IMRET article, but it really can apply to writing a grant, writing a proposal to a certain extent as well. Some of the suggestions I'm going to be giving you. So just briefly again, write IMRET format. You've been inundated with this by me. Introduction, methods, results, discussion. We all know this. I always like to focus on this little cute comic strip from a very famous comic strip called Calvin and Hobbes. It's really famous in the US. So Calvin is the little guy and Hobbes is his the tiger, who's really his stuffed animal, but in his imagination he comes alive. So it says here, do you have an idea for your story yet? No, I'm waiting for an inspiration. You can't just turn on creativity like a faucet. You have to be in the right mood. And of course, what mood is that? Well, last minute panic, right? And often I find as science writers or as academic writers, we tend to use last minute panic as our inspiration. And I want to say there are other ways to do that. So here are some solutions to last minute panic. Have a clear timeline for publication. In general, for a research article where you're doing, lab research or research with human subjects, clinical research, think about 6 to 8 months. Of course, if you do a more longitudinal study, this might be longer, but if you have a fairly contained study design that you can complete within a month or two based on the data you're collecting, your research design execution, 6 to 8 months. Again, this can be longer depending on the longitudinal focus or the focus of your research design. I would suggest that you write every day at whatever time you work best. Is it morning, afternoon, evening, at night? It's totally up to you. But get yourself into a habit of writing every day. I would suggest to join or create a writing group. This could be in person or virtual, right? But know other people who are writing, to whom you're accountable to and that are accountable to you as well. And don't be afraid to write several papers at the same time. It's perfectly fine. Talk about writing phases, and I like this little cartoon, another classic cartoon, Peanuts, by Charles Schulz. I mean, it's one of the most iconic cartoons, I think, in the United States. So there's Snoopy sitting, trying to type on his typewriter on the top of his little doghouse. Sometimes when you are a great writer, the words come out so fast you can hardly put them down on paper. Sometimes, right? Doesn't always happen. So it's okay to take your time. And sometimes if you're writing every day for, let's say, half an hour, you might only get a sentence. Sometimes you might get 3 pages. All of that is okay. So as you're preparing your manuscript, always think about the publication or publications you want to submit it to. Familiarize yourself with their requirements based on headings, what kind of data sets they're looking for. Know what they're looking for, so you're not going to submit to a journal that's not going to accept your work. Consider a journal's impact factor or standing in your field, right? Those are important considerations, particularly if you're up for tenure or promotion. And think carefully if the range of your study is appropriate for the level of journal, like the size of data, study design, complexity. This is a journal that really only looks at clinical studies that have at least 5,000 participants. If yours has 500, you're not going to qualify no matter how well done your project is. Start by sketch, and my suggestion always is you're collecting your data, you've done your analysis. Start not with the intro, not with the discussion, but with the methods and results section, right? And don't be afraid to write more than you might need here. Remember in the previous videos, I've talked a lot about not having too much information, methods and results. You can always take that out later. So my suggestion is just do it. You've done the work, write down what did you do and what did you achieve. And as you're doing that, already think about your tables, graphs, charts, and so on. And then, of course, follow the suggestions we've reviewed earlier about make sure your table, graphs, and charts are appropriate to what you're going to be expressing, the results you're going to be focusing on. So as you're completed your methods and results section, that's a good time to pause and think about, okay, what's the story that I'm telling you? What's the big picture? What's the immediate impact, long-term impact? Does your work continue existing narratives, offer something new, or does it contribute to your field? Those are really important questions to ask yourself as you prepare your discussion section, which I would say is the next step. Sketch out the discussion section, start writing it down, without thinking too much about the right structure, but just getting your ideas down. What are the most significant to include? Are there any surprises, next steps? How will the results affect the general conversation in your field, right? All these elements, as you heard previously, as you heard me talk about previously, are really important for your discussion section. Once you've finished, sketched out and started a draft in your discussion section, then get to your introduction. Think about the existing studies literature that contributes to your reader's understanding of the overall subject area. You don't have to quote and cite, or you don't have to cite everything that's ever written about the subject. It's impossible. Introduction sections, remember, they're 3 to 5 paragraphs. You don't have a lot of space to talk about everything that's important, so really select wisely here. But as you're drafting, if you write more than 5, 6 paragraphs, that's okay too. You can always edit it out. But the idea is just to get your writing and get your stuff out. Again, think about that triangle, right? The inverted triangle. Move from the very general to the specific, culminating in your hypothesis research question. And then think about, as you're drafting introduction, think about the data findings, the key findings you have, so that you can draw really strong connections between introduction and discussion sections, just like the article that Henry and his colleagues wrote, where you have the same citations reappear from the intro, those studies, and then contextualize and put into a context in discussion sections again, on top of what has been written about them in the intro. That's a really nice structure to follow. Once you've done all that and you've polished up a little bit your manuscript, then write your abstract. I often see writers like, oh, what's my abstract for my study? Well, write the article first, then you can write the abstract, right? If you want to have a moving target, as I like to call it, just sketching it out, if that works for you, that's cool, but don't think that you're going to have your abstract written until you have your entire manuscript even polished to a certain extent. And one big tip I always like to give folks, make sure you limit abbreviations in your abstract. Nothing is more distracting than that. So really focus on the abstract is something that your readers will read first. Tell them a quick story about what's happening, and then they can go into your article to find out more stuff. When the revision process, as you're continuing to work on your manuscript, you're doing the abstract, you're revising, I would suggest to revise throughout the writing process in subsections and sections. You don't have to go in the chronological order. I would suggest to review previously written sections after you complete a new section. So, you've written the methods and results section, then you work a little bit on the discussion, and then go back to revise methods and results, right? Because that will actually make more sense to you. And I really like the technique of reading your writing out loud to yourself. Often you're like, wow, this really doesn't make any sense, or like, wow, this is really brilliant. You can have any reaction in between. A couple of other suggestions, and I finish with this. Make sure you check word count, citation style, reference page, overall formatting before you submit. Nothing sucks more than getting your article rejected because you didn't follow the formatting outlines, even though your science and your writing is sound. Make sure all authors have signed off on the paper, right, because that can create some conflicts. I would suggest to find colleagues to review your work, maybe somebody with a different background, to make sure that you're being clear in the passages where you have to be clear, like your intro and discussion. And then always ask yourself, can you summarize the overall point of your paper in a one sentence, or in what we call the elevator pitch? So imagine yourself entering the elevator, riding from the first floor to the 10th floor of the building. That will take, a couple of minutes, depending on the elevator, I guess, but it takes a short amount of time. Can you, in that amount of time, tell somebody in the elevator what's the big deal about your study? If you can't do that, work on being able to do that. It's a very useful skill that is particularly great if you go to conferences and you have to only a few minutes to talk about your work to other people while you're networking. Practicing that skill is really great. Plus, it makes sure you really know what the main contribution is of your work. Okay, so that's it. Happy writing.